The table was set for 5. White linen. 5 place settings. A small arrangement of cream roses in the center that I had called ahead to request. The waiter had already removed 3 of the chairs without being asked. Quietly. The way staff are trained to handle things that embarrass their guests. I did not stop him. I sat straight, both hands in my lap, and watched the door the way you watch something you already know is not coming. My name is Winifred Betrayal. And the night I am about to tell you about was my 63rd birthday. Stafford had texted me that morning at 7:42. Already checked in. Good signal here. We'll call tonight. I read it standing in my kitchen in the dress I had chosen 2 days before, a deep plum, fitted at the waist, the kind of dress a woman puts on when she wants to remind the people who love her that she is still here, still worth showing up for. At the time, I was 3 months into a temporary in-home recovery arrangement after a medical procedure that had left my energy unreliable for a while. That was how Seville had entered our lives through the agency. Temporary support, medication reminders, light household assistance on the days my body moved slower than usual. Nothing dramatic, nothing that was supposed to become personal. I had held the reservation for 3 weeks, confirmed it twice. The table was mine from 7 to 9. Corbin never called. Lenice never called. Not angry silence, just absence. The kind that settles in when everyone assumes someone else has already handled things. I told myself they were busy. I told myself a lot of things that evening that I would stop telling myself before the night was over. I ordered the salmon. I asked for still water. I ate slowly, the way I do when I am being careful not to let my face say what my chest is feeling. The restaurant was warm and full around me. Other tables, other voices, laughter from a birthday party 2 sections over with balloons tied to every chair. I did not look at my phone after 7 o'clock. If any of this sounds familiar, if you have ever sat somewhere waiting for people who never came, I want you to stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. And I need you to understand how it started before you see where it ends. The waiter came back around 8:15. Young man, gentle eyes, the kind of careful politeness that tells you he has read the table and felt sorry about it. He leaned down and said quietly, "Can I get you anything else, ma'am?" I looked up at him. I took 1 breath. "Just the check, please," I said. "We're done here." I meant more than the dinner. I tipped him well, folded my napkin, walked out of that restaurant with my back straight and my face composed, the way my mother taught me to leave any room, like you chose to go. I sat in my car for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 because I watched the clock. I did not cry. Something else happened instead. Something quieter and more permanent than tears. It felt like a lens adjusting. Like the part of me that had been slightly blurred for a long time was coming into focus. Then I drove home. I pulled into the driveway at 8:47 and I noticed it immediately. The space along the left side of the garage where Seville's car sat on the nights she stayed late for her evening shift. It was empty. It had been empty since the night before. Stafford walked through the front door Monday morning like a man returning from something that had restored him. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the gift bag. Not the smile he arranged for me in the doorway. The restoration. There is a particular kind of ease that settles into a man's body when he has spent a weekend being wanted. A looseness in the shoulders, a slowness in the movements. The specific comfort of someone who has been handled with care. I had not put that ease there. I recognized it anyway. "Hey, Win," he said, like it was any Monday. I said, "Welcome home," and turned back to what I was doing. He moved through the house the way he always does, dropping his bag at the foot of the stairs, opening the refrigerator without looking for anything in particular, checking his phone with the screen angled away from me, and placed face down on the counter when he was done. That last part was not new, but I was counting things differently now. I watched him the way you watch something when you have stopped hoping it will surprise you, quietly, completely. He showered, he changed. He came downstairs in fresh clothes with the gift bag in his hand and set it on the kitchen counter between us like an offering. White rope handles, tissue paper folded over the top. The kind of bag that comes from a hotel gift shop or a resort boutique, somewhere with a name on the bottom that is meant to signal something. "I brought you something from the retreat," he said. I looked at the bag. I looked at it long enough that the silence became its own sentence. Then I said, "Thank you, Stafford," and walked out of the kitchen. I did not open it. I have not opened it since. The rest of the day moved the way days do when you are being careful. Slowly, with every small thing feeling slightly louder than it should. I made calls. I watered the plants on the back porch. I did not ask him about the retreat, and he did not offer. By evening, we were two people sharing a house the way strangers share a waiting room, politely, without looking directly at each other. Then my phone lit up. Darlene. No text. Just a screenshot, forwarded without a single word attached, which told me she understood exactly what she was sending and did not want to be the one to say it out loud. It was a post from Seville's personal account. Friends only. But Darlene had followed her months ago, back when Seville first started, and we had all been introduced at a family dinner. The post was a series of short videos. A restaurant I did not recognize. Candlelight. A bottle of wine. Red. The kind Stafford orders when he is relaxed and trying to impress. And in the second clip, just for a moment, his hand, resting on the table, comfortable, at home. The caption read, "He finds peace here." Stafford had liked it. Darlene had captured the post, the like, and the timestamp before anything could be deleted. I saved every image. I set my phone face down on the nightstand. I did not call Darlene back. I did not go downstairs. I did not make a sound. I sat on the edge of my bed and felt something move through me and settle, not anger, not grief. Something colder and more useful than either. Something that had just made a decision. I picked up my phone again. I went to my contacts. I scrolled to a name I had not called in 8 months. My attorney. Paulette Odom's office smelled like cedar and old paper, the kind of room that had absorbed 1,000 serious conversations and given nothing back. I had first walked into it 14 months ago. Not because of Seville. Seville was still just a name on a caregiving agency form at that point. I came because of a Tuesday evening in October when Stafford took a call in the garage with the door closed and came back inside 20 minutes later talking about nothing, smooth and easy, the way men do when they have just finished saying something they cannot afford for you to hear. But it was not only that call. There had been other things before it. Financial conversations that became vague the moment I entered the room. Investment paperwork that stopped appearing openly on his desk. Small shifts in behavior that were easy to dismiss individually and harder to ignore once they began collecting themselves into a pattern. I did not confront him. I made a mental note. And 3 days later, I called Paulette. I had not needed her urgently since, but I had kept her retained, kept the relationship current, kept the file active in the cautious, preliminary way attorneys sometimes advise when a marriage contains financial complexity and unanswered questions. That decision was sitting across from me now in a tailored gray blazer, reading my phone with the careful stillness of someone who had seen worse and was not rattled by any of it. She scrolled through everything Darlene had sent. The videos, the caption, the like, the timestamp. She did not react to any of it the way a friend would. She reacted the way an attorney does, which is to say she became more precise. She set the phone down and looked at me. "How long have you known something was wrong?" "Long enough to be ready," I said. She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once, and we moved forward. I laid out what I had built. A private account maintained throughout the marriage, funded from income Stafford had never tracked because he had never thought to. Independent assets, documented contributions to joint holdings, records I had kept in a safety deposit box. He did not. No existed. I had not built it from suspicion alone. I had built it because I am a woman who has always understood that love and preparation are not opposites. Paulette listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "He doesn't know the full picture." "No," I said, "he doesn't." She pulled a legal pad toward her and began writing. She explained the matrimonial notice letter, what it was, what it triggered, who would receive it, what it communicated to parties connected to certain financial dealings involving Stafford's name. She was careful not to overstate it. The notice itself would not decide anything, but it would formally place interested parties on notice that potential marital claims and asset questions existed and that attorneys were now involved. She said they would need 2 to 3 weeks to prepare it properly. Documentation gathered in the right order, asset records pulled and verified, the filing structured carefully enough that no procedural challenge could easily undermine it later. I listened to every word. I did not flinch at any of it. When she finished, I said, "Take the time you need. Do it right." She wrote something down. I watched her hand move across the page and felt the particular calm of a woman who has made an irreversible decision and is no longer afraid of it. I walked out of that office 40 minutes later into pale morning light. No tears, no trembling. Just the clean, quiet weight of a door swinging open behind me, one I had no intention of turning back to close. I reached my car. I unlocked it, and my phone buzzed in my hand. Lenice. "Mom, are you okay? I heard Dad say you've been a little off lately." I stood there and read it twice. Then I looked up at the street in front of me. Ordinary, unhurried, completely unaware. And I put my phone in my bag without typing a single word back. Paulette's office requested the first round of records on a Wednesday. I did not have to ask what to gather. I had been a careful woman for a long time, careful in ways Stafford had never noticed because he had never thought to look. Joint account statements came first, 14 months of them, printed and tabbed. Then business correspondence connected to a real estate transaction I had heard mentioned exactly twice in passing. Once at dinner, once on a phone call, Stafford had not realized I was close enough to hear. Both times he had spoken about it the way men speak about things they consider entirely their own. I had said nothing either time. I had simply filed it away in the part of my mind I reserved for things that did not yet have a name. They had a name now. Over the following week, the shape of it became clearer. The transaction was layered through multiple entities, a holding company, a secondary LLC, a partner whose name I did not recognize. Paulette explained that none of that was automatically improper on its own. People structure investments that way every day for liability, tax, and financing reasons. What mattered was timing, disclosure, and intent. And the timing of this particular arrangement sat too neatly beside the deterioration of our marriage to ignore. The concern was not that Stafford had built a business deal. It was that portions of it appeared positioned in a way that might later allow him to argue. Certain interests fell outside the marital estate entirely, or had been separated before disputes inside the marriage formally surfaced. Paulette was careful about her wording. She said courts look closely at timing, documentation, and financial behavior once divorce proceedings begin involving significant assets. It was cautious work, planned work. The kind of work done by a man thinking several exits ahead before anyone else realizes there is an exit being prepared at all. I called Paulette on a Thursday evening and sat in my car in the driveway to do it. "He was never planning to stay," I said. "He was planning to leave with everything he could carry." A brief pause. Then Paulette said, "Then we make sure the court sees the full picture before anything gets moved too far out of reach." I went back inside and made dinner and did not say a word. 2 days later, I was working through the joint account records when I found it. A charge I had passed over the first time because the date had not registered immediately. It registered now. My birthday. A restaurant I did not know, 40 minutes outside the city. The charge showed 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, the kind Stafford orders when he is relaxed, red, expensive enough to signal something but not so expensive it draws attention. The receipt had been paid on his personal card and later reimbursed through an account transfer tied to shared household funds. He had not even been careful about that. I set the paper down on the desk in front of me. There are things you tell yourself across the length of a marriage. That distance is stress. That coldness is preoccupation. That a man's absence is the price of his ambition and not a sign of where he has chosen to be instead. I had told myself those things for long enough that they had started to feel like facts. The receipt ended that. Not loudly. There was no moment of rage, no breaking of anything. Just a quiet, internal collapse. The version of my marriage I had been maintaining in my mind folding in on itself slowly, completely, like a building whose foundation had been gone for years and had only just finished falling. I sat with that for a long time. Then I filed the receipt behind the tabbed statements, closed the folder, and went to bed. The next morning, I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door open. The particular sound of a key turning in a lock. Smooth, practiced, the movement of someone who had done it enough times to feel entitled to it. Seville walked in like it was any other morning, like nothing in the world had shifted. I had watched Seville move through this house for 8 months without truly seeing her. That was the thing that sat with me now. Not the betrayal itself, but the blindness that made it possible. She had always carried herself with a particular ease here. Unhurried, familiar, the way she opened cabinet doors without hesitating, the way she moved through rooms like she had already measured them. I had called it confidence. I had called it good at her job. I was only now understanding what I had actually been watching. I did not confront her. That was never going to be my move. Instead, I watched with the kind of attention that does not announce itself. On the days Stafford worked from home, Seville found reasons to position herself near his office. A water tray, a question about the afternoon schedule, a small adjustment to something in the hallway just outside his door. She lingered past her hours on those days. Not by much. 30 minutes, sometimes 45. Enough to mean something. Not enough to be confronted about. Toward me, she was performance. Warm, attentive, slightly too careful. The kind of care that is trying to look like itself. On a Tuesday, she brought my afternoon medication to the sitting room and set it on the table beside me with both hands, the way she always did, and said, "You seem tired today. You should rest more." I looked at her steadily. "I'm not tired, Seville. I'm paying attention." Something moved behind her eyes, fast, almost invisible. Then she smiled, said nothing, and left the room. I let her go. 2 days later, Stafford left for a late afternoon meeting downtown. I waited until his car cleared the end of the street. Then I walked upstairs. There is a particular quality to a house when you are moving through it looking for something you already half know you will find. Every surface feels more specific. Every closed door feels like a sentence. I went into the master bathroom. Seville had no professional reason to be in that room, ever. Her work was common spaces, kitchen, laundry. the guest areas on the main floor. The master was mine, had always been presented as mine. I opened the cabinet beneath the second sink. Stafford sighed. Rows of his things: cologne, a spare razor, a folded washcloth. I moved them aside methodically, the way you handle something you are not yet ready to name. It was behind the second row. A small glass bottle of perfume, half used, no bag around it. No explanation for its presence except the only explanation that existed. I knew the scent before I lifted it. I had been smelling it for months, on mornings when Seville arrived and Stafford had already been home for an hour, when the air in the kitchen held something that did not belong to me. I had noticed it the way you notice something that does not yet have a place to land. It had a place now. I set the bottle back exactly where I found it. I replaced everything around it. I closed the cabinet. I walked downstairs and sat in the kitchen and felt the last remaining question in me go quiet. Not dramatically, the way a light goes out in a room you were already leaving. That evening, my phone rang. Paulette. "It's ready," she said. I did not hesitate. "Send it." Stafford's phone rang at 8 in the morning while he was still at the breakfast table. He answered the first call with his fork still in his hand. I heard the tone shift in his voice within the first 30 seconds. Not what he said, just the way the air went out of it. He set the fork down. By the time the second call came, he was in the hallway with the kitchen door pulled most of the way closed behind him. By the third, he had stopped pacing. I could see him through the gap in the door, standing completely still in the hallway, one hand pressed flat against the wall. I poured my coffee. I sat by the window. I watched the light on the back porch and let the morning be exactly what it was. When he came back into the kitchen, his face had been through something. I could see the residue of it. The confusion that had moved into calculation and then into something quieter and more serious than either. He stood in the entrance of the kitchen and looked at me the way a man looks at a room when he is trying to figure out whether something inside it has shifted while he was gone. "Did you do something?" Not a question. A very careful statement wearing the shape of one. I looked at him over my cup. I took my time with it. "I spoke to my attorney," I said. "Is there a problem?" The silence that followed was long enough to have weight. He stared at me. I held his gaze without shifting, without softening, without offering him anything to hold on to. I had spent 31 years in this marriage being readable. I was done with that. He did not answer me. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily and stared at the table. And I turned back to the window and finished my coffee. What had happened, I would later understand more clearly through Paulette, was this. The matrimonial notice letter had reached the investor group connected to Stafford's real estate transaction and triggered exactly the kind of caution those groups are trained to exercise when ownership exposure inside a marriage becomes legally uncertain. Nothing had collapsed overnight, but discussions slowed immediately. Documents under review stopped moving forward pending clarification. Investors who had no interest in becoming entangled in a contested marital asset dispute began requesting additional disclosures and chose to wait until the legal picture became clearer before committing themselves further. 14 months of careful positioning had suddenly become complicated by questions Stafford had clearly hoped nobody would ask. The issue was not that the transaction itself was automatically improper. Paulette later explained that structures involving holding companies and layered partnerships were common in large real estate deals. What changed was the timing and exposure. Once attorneys and investors became aware there could be disputed marital interests connected to portions of the transaction, caution replaced momentum. People who had been moving confidently started moving carefully instead. Stafford sat at that table for a long time. I did not fill the silence for him. At some point, he looked up at me. Really looked. The way he had not looked at me in longer than I could name. and I saw something register behind his eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, recognition. The particular unsettled recognition of a man who has just realized that the woman sitting across from him is not who he thought she was. Or rather, that she is exactly who she has always been. And he had simply stopped paying attention. Then his phone buzzed on the table between us. He looked at the screen. I watched his jaw tighten slightly. He looked up at me. Then he turned the phone face down and let it ring through to voicemail. In 31 years of marriage, I had never once seen Stafford let that particular caller go unanswered. Not in front of me. Not anywhere that I had seen. I picked up my cup. I said nothing. I did not need to. Paulette called on a Thursday afternoon while I was folding laundry. "You should know," she said, without preamble. "The Marsh family has retained their own counsel." I set down what I was holding and sat on the edge of the bed. Paulette did not deal in drama. When she offered information, it was because it mattered. So, I listened with the full weight of my attention while she told me what she had learned through the careful, quiet channels that experienced attorneys maintain between themselves. Cornelius Marsh was not a man who made reactive decisions. He had spent 30 years building a respected professional reputation, the kind that got his calls returned, got his family invited into the right circles, and kept unpleasant situations handled quietly before they grew larger than necessary. He had cleaned up complications involving Seville before. He was practiced at it. What he was not practiced at was walking into a situation and discovering that someone else had already documented more than he expected. He had gone into the meeting believing this was a private domestic issue, a married man, an affair, a situation that could likely be resolved quietly before reputations or finances became entangled publicly. He expected a preliminary conversation about containment. What Paulette's office had assembled was already beyond that stage. He sat across from his attorney and reviewed 14 months of documented financial movement. He saw the screenshots, time-stamped, preserved, already organized. He saw the receipt from the night of my birthday. He saw the documented overlap between Seville's professional role in my home and areas she had no reason to access as part of her assignment. What he was looking at was not gossip anymore. It was a structured legal timeline. Paulette told me the exact moment his composure shifted. It was when he realized Seville's social media post, the one published with the confidence of someone who believed the situation was emotionally secure, had already been preserved as part of a formal legal file. He had entered the conversation hoping to reduce exposure. He left understanding most of the relevant exposure had already been documented before he arrived. He did not call Seville when he left that meeting. He called Stafford. He came into the conversation asking what could still be controlled, Paulette said. He left focused on limiting further damage. There is a difference. Good, I said. Let him sit with that. What Cornelius told Stafford I would piece together later. But the message was clear enough in outline. Resolve the situation before it creates broader professional and legal consequences for everyone attached to it. He was not calling as an angry father defending his daughter. He was calling as a man trying to prevent a worsening situation from spreading further into his family's professional life. Seville did not know any of this yet. She was still moving through her days with the confidence of a woman who believed both the man beside her and the people behind her were still standing firmly in place. She did not yet understand that Stafford was already pulling away, and her family had begun distancing themselves from the situation entirely. The certainty she had built herself around was starting to fracture quietly from the outside inward. There is something almost sorrowful about watching a person continue standing inside a structure that has already started giving way beneath them. Almost. My phone buzzed on the bed beside me while Paulette was still speaking. I looked at the screen. Corbin. For the first time since my birthday. Corbin called at 2:30 in the afternoon. I let it ring twice, then a third time, then I picked up. Mom. His voice had that careful quality, the one my son gets when he is trying to sound casual about something that is not casual at all. I had known that voice since he was 14 years old. Corbin, I said, how are you? I'm good. I'm good. A pause. How are you doing? I'm fine, I said, and I meant it in every way he was not prepared for. We moved through a few minutes of surface conversation the way families do when someone is working up to something: the weather, his work, a question about whether I needed anything from the store. I let him take his time. I was not in a hurry. I had learned in recent weeks that patience was the sharpest tool I owned. Then he said, "Is everything okay? Between you and Dad, I mean." I set down the glass I was holding, quietly. Corbin, I said, what exactly did your father tell you about my birthday dinner? Silence. Not the silence of someone who doesn't know the answer. The silence of someone who has just realized that the answer they gave was the wrong one and cannot remember choosing to give it. He said, Corbin stopped, started again. He said you weren't feeling well, that you might cancel. I see, I said. And did you call me to confirm that? What followed was a different kind of silence entirely, longer, heavier, the kind that does not stay empty. It fills itself, slowly, with everything a person should have done and chose not to. I could hear my son breathing on the other end of the line, and I let that silence do what I could not do for him. He was putting it together. I could feel it happening in real time, the sequence of it assembling itself piece by piece. His father's call, the story he had accepted without question, the dinner reservation he had known about for weeks because I had mentioned it at least twice, his mother's phone, which he had not called, the table set for 5 that I had sat at alone. Mom, You accepted what he told you? I said. Not harshly, just plainly. Without picking up the phone to check with me directly. Another silence. There are moments in a parent's life when the most loving thing you can do is refuse to make something easier than it is. Corbin needed to sit inside what he had just understood. He needed to feel the full shape of it, not because I wanted him to suffer, but because a man who does not understand what he participated in will participate in it again. I loved my son too much for that. I did not fill the quiet. I did not soften the edges. I let the truth occupy the space between us and do its necessary work. When enough time had passed, I said, when you're ready to have a real conversation, I'm here. Then I ended the call. I set my phone on the counter and stood at the kitchen window for a moment, watching the yard. Nothing dramatic moved through me. Just a steady, quiet clarity. The kind that comes from saying exactly what needed to be said, and not one word more. 53 minutes later, my phone lit up again. Lenice. Seville arrived at 8:15 with her bag on her shoulder and her keys in her hand, the same way she had arrived for 8 months. I watched her come through the front door from the top of the stairs. She did not look up. She moved straight to the kitchen the way she always did. Unhurried, familiar, like a woman who had stopped questioning her place in the house a long time ago. I had submitted the formal replacement request to the agency 10 days earlier. Because my temporary in-home support arrangement was already approaching its scheduled conclusion following my recovery period, the transition itself raised no immediate concern on paper. Agencies handled those adjustments all the time. Overlapping calendars, rotating assignments, gradual reductions in care hours. 2 weeks remained on Seville's assignment. She had not been told yet. I had made sure of that. I came downstairs and we exchanged the usual morning pleasantries, the kind that exist purely as architecture, holding the shape of a normal interaction so neither party has to acknowledge what is actually sitting underneath it. She asked if I had slept well. I told her I had. She mentioned the weather. I agreed with her about it. But something was different about Seville this week, and I could see it clearly now. The ease that had always been her most reliable quality was fraying at the edges. Small things. The way she checked her phone more than usual and then set it down too quickly. The way she moved through her tasks with slightly too much concentration. The way people do when they are trying to keep their thoughts from wandering somewhere dangerous. Stafford had been cold and distracted all week. I had watched that too. The short answers, the early retreats to his office, the way he moved through the house like a man trying to occupy less air than usual. Whatever was happening between them, Seville was feeling the withdrawal of it and did not yet know how to carry that weight. Her parents had been calling. She had not been going home. In the early afternoon, I was in the sitting room with a book I was not really reading when she appeared in the doorway. She came in slowly and straightened something on the side table that did not need straightening. Then she said, "Is everything all right between you and Stafford?" I set my book down. I looked at her with the full, unhurried calm of a woman who had already answered every question this conversation could possibly contain. "Why would you ask me that, Seville?" She opened her mouth, closed it. The silence that settled between us then was not awkward. It was revealing. She had come into that room looking for information, for a crack, a reaction, some indication of what I knew or did not know. What she found instead was a woman giving her nothing at all. That silence was the most honest exchange we had ever had. She left the room a few minutes later. I picked my book back up and did not watch her go. What Seville did not know as she moved through the rest of that afternoon was that the agency had already begun preparing her transition out of the assignment. A replacement caregiver had been interviewed and tentatively scheduled pending the routine administrative handoff. Seville was finishing out an assignment in a house that had already begun reorganizing itself without her in it. Every room she walked through, every task she completed, all of it already belonged to someone else's calendar. She left at 5:30. I heard her car pull out of the driveway and did not move from where I was sitting. That evening, she called Stafford. This time, he answered. And whatever he said to her during that conversation, she was not the same woman the next morning. Seville did not come in the next morning. The agency called at 8:45 to report that she had cited a personal matter and would not be available for her shift. The woman on the phone was apologetic. I told her it was fine and thanked her and set the phone down without any particular expression on my face. I did not need Seville in the room to read what had happened. I had learned to read this house the way you read weather, not from what was said, but from what the air was doing. And the air that morning was telling me everything. Stafford was present, but reduced. That is the only word that fits. The particular arrogance that had always been his natural way of occupying a room, the certainty that settled in his shoulders and his stride, the ease of a man who believed himself in control of the relevant variables, was gone. What moved through the kitchen in its place was quieter and more careful. He poured his coffee without speaking. He stood at the counter looking out the back window at nothing specific. He checked his phone and put it away, and did not check it again. I recognized what I was seeing. It was fear dressed in the clothing of composure, the performance of a man who has made a significant decision and is not yet certain it was the right one, and is hoping very much that his face is not saying so. I let him have the morning. That evening, he came and sat across from me in the sitting room. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, a posture I associated with conversations he had rehearsed, and said, I think we need to talk. I looked at him. I've been ready to talk for a long time, Stafford, I said. You're just now arriving. Something moved across his face. He pressed forward anyway. He told me the situation with Seville was over, that he had ended it, that there were things he said to her on that call he could not take back, but had believed were necessary. He spoke carefully, each sentence measured, each word chosen to convey the minimum required admission while preserving as much ground as possible. He never used the word affair. He did not say he was sorry. He said he wanted to know if there was a way through this. I listened to every word without interrupting once. What Stafford did not understand, sitting across from me with his rehearsed posture and his managed language, was that every careful sentence he spoke was landing inside a legal record that already had his shape in it. He was not confessing to me. He was confirming for me. There is a distance between those two things that he could not have measured and I did not explain. When he finished, I sat with it for a moment, not for his benefit, because I wanted to feel the full weight of the last variable resolving. I was not relieved. Relief belongs to people who were not sure. I had been sure for weeks. What I felt was something quieter and more complete, the particular stillness of a woman whose every decision has just been validated by the man who made them necessary. I looked at him steadily. I'd like you out of the bedroom, Stafford, I said. Starting tonight. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded and stood up and left the room without a single word of argument. The doorbell rang at 9:17 on a Saturday morning. I was not expecting anyone. I opened the door and there was Lenice, grocery bags in both hands, eyes that were dry now but had not been dry recently. The kind of eyes that have been worked on during a car ride. Mascara slightly too careful, jaw slightly too set. My daughter had been crying and had decided I would not see that, and I loved her enough to let her believe I didn't. I brought food, she said. Come in, I said. She moved past me into the kitchen and began unpacking without being asked, the way she does when she needs something to do with her hands. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her and did not rush her toward whatever she had come to say. She would get there. She always did. She had found the post through a friend of a friend, someone who had seen it before Seville's account went quiet, and had thought Lenice should know. She had spoken to Corbin. She had spent time she could not get back sitting with the picture those pieces assembled when placed together. She came and sat across from me when there was nothing left to unpack. Mama. Her voice was careful. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. I should have called you to confirm. She said it the way people say things they have been rehearsing, not because the words are false, but because saying them out loud is the only way to make them real. When he told me you weren't feeling well, I should have picked up the phone and called you myself. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Yes, I said. You should have. But you're here now. Her shoulders came down about an inch, just an inch. But I felt it. Then she told me about the calls. Stafford had called her twice in the week before my birthday. Not once, twice, with the same story delivered in the same measured tone each time. That her mother seemed tired, that I might be coming down with something, that the dinner might not happen and she should wait to hear from me directly before making plans. He had been deliberate about it. 2 calls. Same story. No room left for her to act on her own instinct. He had not left either of his children an exit. I sat with that for a moment. The specific calculation of it, the advance work required to ensure that no one would call to check on me. That took intention. That took a man who knew exactly what he was doing and did it anyway. What I felt was not new anger. I was past the place where new information made me angry. What I felt was a deepening of something I had already fully understood. The way a photograph becomes more defined as it develops. Not different, just clearer. I looked at my daughter across my kitchen table. Her hands were warm under mine. She was here, looking at me clearly, for the first time in longer than this situation had been building. That mattered. That was worth receiving. I let myself receive it. After a while, she looked at me and said, "What are you going to do?" I looked back at her, my daughter, my girl, finally in the right room asking the right question. "What I've already been doing," I said. Paulette called on a Wednesday morning while I was having my first cup of coffee. "Cornelius Marsh has requested a meeting," she said. "Not with Stafford's attorney, with me." I set my cup down. "When?" "Tomorrow. He called yesterday evening. His attorney made the request formally this morning." I thought about that for a moment. A man like Cornelius Marsh, who had spent 30 years building a reputation careful enough to keep his family out of public embarrassment, now walking voluntarily into my attorney's office. That was not a small movement. Men like Cornelius do not request meetings unless they have already calculated that not requesting one may cost more. "Let him come," I said. Paulette called me the following afternoon. She described him the way I had imagined. Composed, deliberate, the particular bearing of a man accustomed to difficult conversations and professional rooms where preparation matters. He had arrived with his own attorney, a yellow legal pad, and the quiet confidence of someone used to handling problems before they spread further than necessary. He was not the most prepared person present. Paulette walked him through the documented timeline methodically, the screenshots with their timestamps, the financial records connected to Stafford's real estate dealings, the documented overlap between Seville's professional access to my home and the boundaries she had crossed inside it. She laid everything out piece by piece, each item supporting the next. His composure held through the first 15 minutes. Paulette said the moment it shifted was precise. She placed the post on the table, printed, time-stamped, preserved as part of the formal file, and watched Cornelius Marsh look at his daughter's caption and understand, for the first time, that this situation had already moved beyond private damage control. The material had been documented properly. Attorneys had it. Timelines had been established. Whatever happened next would happen inside a legal structure, not behind closed doors. He had walked in believing he was early enough to contain the situation. He had arrived to find the situation already organized. He came in asking what his family's exposure might be, Paulette told me. He left understanding it was more serious than he expected. "Good," I said. What followed, Paulette explained, was that Cornelius, acting through his attorney, formally advised Seville to resign from the caregiving agency and cease direct contact with Stafford, while the legal and financial issues surrounding the situation were being sorted out. The recommendation was documented carefully, not because anyone believed an affair itself was criminal, but because continued overlap between Seville's professional role and the deteriorating marital dispute risked creating further complications for everyone attached to it. Seville refused. I absorbed that without surprise. A woman who had posted that caption publicly, who had come this far believing she was secure, was not going to suddenly reverse herself because her father told her to step back. But refusal had a cost. Stafford was already distancing himself. Her agency situation was becoming unstable. Her parents were no longer shielding her from consequences. The certainty she had been moving through my house with for months was beginning to thin out around the edges, even if she had not fully accepted it yet. I thought about what it must feel like to keep standing inside something after the structure holding it up had already started giving way. Then my doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon, and I looked through the window and saw Seville's car in my driveway. I saw her car before I opened the door. I stood at the window for a moment and looked at it, parked slightly crooked in the driveway. The way you park, when your mind is somewhere else entirely. Then I went to the door and opened it myself and looked at Seville without saying a word. She was not who she had been. The woman who had posted that caption, easy, certain, publicly comfortable with what she was doing, was not standing on my porch. What stood there now was someone whose carefully arranged world had started coming apart in visible places. I could see it in her face, in the tension sitting high in her shoulders, in the way she was holding her bag strap with both hands, like it was the only stable thing left. Stafford had pulled away. Her agency situation was collapsing. Her parents had stopped shielding her from consequences she had never expected to face alone. Whatever certainty had carried her this far had begun thinning out around the edges. She had driven here looking for something. I could see the looking in her eyes. She had always wanted a reaction from me. From the first month she stepped into my house, I understood that, even before I fully understood why. A reaction would have meant I was threatened. A reaction would have given her a story to carry, proof that what she had done had shaken the woman whose life she had been moving through. I had never given her one. I was not about to start. The silence between us stretched long enough that she had to fill it. "I think you and I should talk," she said. "I don't have anything to say to you, Seville." She shifted her weight. Something crossed her face, frustration or desperation, or both, trying to occupy the same space at once. Then she said the sentence she had probably rehearsed all the way over here. "He told me he was choosing me." I looked at her. Not with anger. I had nothing that resembled anger left for this situation. Not with satisfaction either, though I understood why someone might expect that. What I felt looking at her in that moment was something closer to pity. The specific pity you feel for a person who has built their entire sense of worth around a story another person never truly intended to keep. "He didn't choose you," I said. "He used the nearest available option. There's a difference." I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for exactly the amount of time it took to confirm that she was not going to ring the bell again. Then I walked to the sitting room, picked up my phone, and called Paulette. I told her the time of the visit, the duration, what was said. Paulette asked 2 clarifying questions and told me to write it down while it was fresh. The exact words, the exact sequence. Seville had already been formally advised through counsel to cease contact with both Stafford and the situation surrounding the case. Showing up at my home after that was no longer something people could dismiss as emotional confusion. It became part of the record. "She handed us something we didn't have to go looking for," Paulette said. "I know," I said. I hung up and sat with the quiet of the house for a while. There was nothing dramatic in me. No trembling, no flood of feeling, no need to process what had just happened at the door. Just a clean, settled confirmation. I was the only person in this situation who had seen clearly from the beginning exactly what she was building her life around. That had not changed. It was never going to change. My phone buzzed an hour later. An attorney's name I did not recognize. Stafford's. Corbin was in the lobby when I arrived. He was sitting in one of the chairs along the far wall, still in his work clothes, hands clasped between his knees. He had not been invited. He had not called ahead. He had simply come because he was my son, and he had finally understood what that required of him. When he saw me cross the lobby, he stood up and said nothing. I walked toward him, touched his arm once, briefly, and kept walking toward the conference room. That was enough. It was exactly enough. Stafford's attorney was already seated when Paulette and I came in. Young, precise, the kind of professionally composed that reads as confidence until it meets something it did not prepare for. He had a notepad, a folder, and the settled expectation of a man who believes he is walking into a negotiation he can shape. Stafford came in 2 minutes later and sat across from me. I looked at him. He looked at me. And I watched something move through his face that I had not seen there before. Not anger, not defiance, but a specific disorientation. The look of a man who thought he had mapped the terrain and is only now understanding that the map was wrong from the beginning. Paulette opened the file. What followed was not a negotiation. It was a presentation. 14 months of documented financial movement laid out in sequence. The screenshots, time-stamped and labeled. The developing forensic picture of the real estate transaction. The holding company. The LLC structure. The layered positioning that raised questions about whether certain assets had been intentionally separated ahead of anticipated marital disputes. The record of Seville's presence in areas of the home that fell outside any professional boundary. The letter responses. Every piece placed in order, each one connecting to the next. The broader pattern becoming harder and harder to dismiss as coincidence. Stafford's attorney asked for the first recess 20 minutes in. They came back and Paulette continued. The real estate transaction had now been formally pulled into the discovery process for further review alongside the broader marital estate. The investor group had not collapsed overnight, but they had withdrawn from active movement on the deal once the matrimonial notice letter introduced potential exposure questions they did not want attached to the transaction. Funding discussions slowed. Additional disclosures had been requested. Timelines that Stafford had clearly spent months building around were no longer fully under his control. Every financial position Stafford had spent 14 months carefully arranging was now subject to scrutiny inside a legal process he could no longer manage privately. Stafford's attorney asked for a second recess after the financial picture was complete. The session had been running for 2.5 hours. When they returned, Stafford did not speak. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the middle distance. And I understood that he was doing the arithmetic and finding that it did not resolve in his favor no matter how he arranged it. His attorney asked for a week to consult with his client. Paulette agreed without hesitation because she could afford to. The proposed terms were already structured. The week was not a victory. It was breathing room being requested by people who had realized the situation was far more developed than they initially understood. I did not feel triumph sitting in that room. I want to be precise about that. Triumph is loud and needs an audience. What I felt was resolution, quiet, complete, the specific piece of a woman who did the right things in the right order and is now watching them hold. Everyone began gathering their things. Then Stafford said my name. Just my name. Nothing attached to it. I picked up my folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked out. 6 months later, I was at a table again. My own dining room this time, my own chairs, my own dishes, the cream roses I had bought for myself that morning because I wanted them and did not need another reason. Lenice across from me, Corbin beside her. The table set for 3. Exactly 3. With nothing missing and nothing waiting to arrive. I had cooked. That felt important. Not because anyone expected it, but because I had wanted to stand in my own kitchen on a Saturday morning and make something unhurried. And the wanting of it had come back to me, the way appetite returns after a long illness, quietly, without announcement, just suddenly present again. The divorce had been finalized 11 days prior. The settlement reflected the full marital estate. Every asset Stafford had spent 14 months trying to position outside the marriage had been pulled into discovery, examined, and accounted for according to what the law and Paulette's preparation required. The investment group connected to the real estate deal had withdrawn months earlier rather than risk becoming entangled in contested marital property issues. And the structure he had built around that transaction had not protected him the way he believed it would. He had spent more than a year preparing an exit that ultimately cost him far more than he expected. I did not celebrate when Paulette called with the final confirmation. I made a cup of tea, sat by the window I had always liked, and let the morning be quiet around me. That was celebration enough. We were halfway through dinner when Corbin set his fork down. He had been carrying something all evening. I could see it in the way he was eating, present, but slightly elsewhere, working up to something between bites. He looked at me the way my son looks at me when he is done protecting himself from a truth. "I'm sorry, Mama," he said. "For the birthday, for not calling, for all of it." I looked at him, really looked, at the man my boy had become, sitting at my table with the full weight of what he understood now visible in his face. No deflection, no qualification, just the thing itself, offered plainly. "I know," I said. "Now eat." His eyes went soft for just a moment. Then he picked up his fork. Lenise reached under the table and squeezed his hand and said nothing, which was exactly right. Seville Marsh was no longer in the city. After her unannounced visit to my home, despite clear instructions from both her family's attorney and the agency handling her resignation, her father stepped in quietly. Arrangements were made. She left within the month. No public explanation followed. Her social accounts went silent not long after, and eventually people stopped asking questions out loud, though I knew some still wondered privately what had happened. The Marsh family kept their distance from the situation after that. In certain professional and social circles, people remembered the story for a while longer than they probably wanted them to. Reputation has a long memory when embarrassment becomes attached to paperwork. I did not spend time thinking about any of that. It was not mine to carry. What was mine was this table. These two people. This particular Saturday evening with the light coming through the dining room window at the angle I had always loved and never had enough quiet to simply sit inside. I had carried something heavy for a long time. I had set it down in the right place. What remained was mine. All of it. Completely, without remainder. I said nothing, and everything heard me.